So I'm Dan Duggan. I'm one of the managing editors of Crain's Detroit business. We're the main business media publication for Metro Detroit, which sometimes involves Ann Arbor, sometimes doesn't. And I oversee a whole bunch of things there. And I've covered everything from politics to tech companies and commercial real estate. So we're all really lucky. This is a great panel. We've had some cool conversations backstage, and so I'm gonna go short on the introductions because other than Zafar, you've heard from everybody else. So I'm gonna start with him, Zafar Razzacki, and in the middle, who is a project manager at Maven, and I'm just gonna say it's a really cool concept that I'm looking forward to having him explain to everybody. He's part engineer, part creative spirit. He's had product and marketing roles at companies you've heard of, maybe like Google. At General Motors now, he's focused on transforming the way people move around in cities and urban centers. So I'm going to let him explain it in a few minutes. Next to me, who we just heard from, John. Doesn't need a second introduction. It's a great presentation.
I need no introduction.
None? Especially since you just stayed right out on the stage. Right. But he is the creative director at lkon Interactive, and I think she gave a very good introduction of him as well. On the end, we have Qasar Younis, COO and partner at Combinator, who you heard from earlier, and has lots of cool ideas on things that will add a lot to this discussion. And last but not least, next to him is Jesse Vollmar, the CEO and founder of FarmLogs. So I think it's an interesting position. We've heard from everyone. So the cool part now is to have some of the speakers that you heard earlier are all here together, and that we can kind of kick some different ideas around. We have 30 to 35 minutes, and I'd like to maybe take a pause when we have maybe 10 minutes left, see if you guys have any questions. I don't want to be the only one asking questions here. But and I wanted to start with, I guess you've heard from everyone except for Zafar. So Zafar, can you maybe explain a little bit about what Maven is? Because I think that it'll kind of be pertinent later on of what mindset you're coming from in terms of how you interpret things.
Sure. Maven is General Motors' approach towards thinking about the vehicle differently. So what we're seeing is that trends in population is that more and more people are living in or choosing to live in dense urban city centers and less interested in suburbia and the traditional American dream of owning a big home and having a garage with 2 or 3 vehicles in it. So we as a company that manufacture those vehicles have to think differently about how we get people into those cars. So today Maven manifests itself as a car sharing platform. So you can, through an app, reserve a vehicle for whether it's hourly use or daily use. We make it pretty flexible, and you get a pretty robust portfolio of vehicles to select from. We think that lays the groundwork for many people choosing to leave vehicle ownership to the side and rely on programs like this exclusively, which, when I put my dreamer hat on and think about the future, starts to set up a world where you can on-demand reserve a vehicle, and maybe, in this period of time, it could be a Lyft or an Uber that comes and picks you up, and again, you're using that in place of your own owned vehicle. But in the future, pull the driver out of the equation, and we want cars to come drive themselves to your door, pick you up, and take you where you need to go. So that's Maven in a nutshell. That includes vehicle technologies. It includes consumer-facing apps and intelligent solutions to help people figure out ways to get from point A to point B. And our team is working on cracking that problem in a lot of different ways.
I mean, just think about that for a minute, though. You just had someone from General Motors saying, we're thinking about ways that people don't have to own cars. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's someone from Apple saying, let's think about ways that people don't have to buy phones. I think it's, and I think it's a big part of the the tech infrastructure of Metro Detroit, and I want to talk about that later. Something that Qasar and I were talking a little bit about prior to this, but Qasar, when they were introducing you earlier and talking about Y Combinator and some of the household name companies that have come out of there, there's a lot of companies that are household name success stories right now, like Airbnb. That it was an idea 3-4 years ago. I mean, the pace of technology is so rapid. You guys have a great track record of picking startups and picking companies early on and making them, fostering them. And what is it that you look for when you're evaluating all the companies that want Y Combinator to take them under their wing? What are the building blocks? What are the things that you guys look for?
So there's a bunch of generic kind of platitudes that a lot of investors will talk about, like great team, great market, et cetera, et cetera. I won't rehash those. I think probably what we're uniquely focused on is, we are very, very early. Probably 2/3 of the companies we fund don't have a product, so it really is very early in the company's life. So at that point, I think we just look for trying to find a couple of people, usually 2, usually not 1, usually not more than 4. People who have an interesting, perspective and an interesting idea that they want to explore, and then we think does anybody want this? Our motto at YC is make something people want. That's easy to say, very hard to actually do. Number one, the founders have to be able to make something. So you have to have technical skills, and then understanding what people want is very, very difficult. I mean, it's in kind of all facets of life. It's very hard to know what people really fundamentally want, especially in the sense of large adoption. I mean, we talked about before, what always gets missed when we talk about venture capital and we talk about institutional capital investing in companies is that we're not looking to invest in, restaurants or something that's small. And so then the question becomes, well, what's big? It's very hard to see Reddit when it's 2 people to understand Reddit could be big. So you have to kind of focus on, well, will anybody want this concept of the front page of the internet? But big, in true definition, is a public company. So you're talking about a business that has the potential to do 10, 50, 100 million in revenue per month. And that automatically removes vast majority of companies from the equation. And I think just a lot of people founders who are trying to build companies don't emotionally understand how big that hurdle is. It's a massive, massive hurdle. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the company needs to look like when it's 2 people. There's a huge difference, but that's the kind of goal you have to go towards. And so when we're sitting there evaluating somebody like Jesse across the table, who has kind of a seemingly strange idea about taking software into farms, you have to. It's kind of like, I think my mentality is being very pragmatic and simultaneously being very optimistic. And I think those are tough things to balance, because usually when you're pragmatic, it's usually just a word to say, I want to be an asshole, and I can't say that.
There's lots of other words we can use.
Socially acceptable thing to say is being pragmatic. It's no, it's is there actually something? Is there actually a business here? And that's probably the other thing is, we actually do fund nonprofits, which is kind of a separate conversation, but we are looking to fund businesses. So we're looking for organizations that will ultimately make money. We're investors, and so I think having those, putting all the things that I've just said into kind of a bucket, that's generally what's happening in the 10 minutes we use. We use 10 minutes to decide if we're going to invest in the company or not.
Wow.
So it is, I'm not on my phone in those 10 minutes. It's an intense 10 minutes. I'm an alum as well, by the way. I also went through YC as well. So our companies actually were not.
Well, and one of the things I wanted to know, where I was kind of going with this too, was, right next to you, Jesse, you were chosen by Y Combinator, and Qasar, I don't know. Were you there for that 10 minutes with Jesse?
No,
how did that happen?
That was the point in my life where after I joined YC, but I wasn't a part of YC.
Okay.
It's about a year and a half.
Well, Jesse, maybe one of the things we could talk about here briefly is, I think you have a cool story, and how you go from being a 5th generation farmer to bringing tech to the agricultural sector, which is a sector not necessarily known for tech. Can you just give the overview of your path from from idea to funding, in a way that makes it seem possible for other people?
Sure. Well, I mean, even just thinking about, the topic of this panel of how the future is being reshaped and transformed, that was really the starting place for FarmLogs, is seeing that wasn't really happening in agriculture. And for whatever reason, we all assumed that, farming, it doesn't really need technology. And I think one of the things that, maybe, I don't know, you could agree with this or not, but that technology is really going to reshape every part of our world, even these old industries like agriculture that, have been part of humanity for its eternity, forever. So, we saw that because we were there in it. And I'll tell a couple stories. The very first computer I ever saw was on my family's farm. When it was too early to have internet out on farms, we actually had these satellite terminals that would beam in subscription data to commodity pricing and weather, called Data Transmission Network. You'd drive around and you'd see one of these satellite dishes on top of everyone's shop and shed, and that was fascinating to me as a kid. I'm like 4 years old. You can't get internet anywhere, but you can get these satellite terminals that'll beam in live weather data, and then you look at like the self-driving car thing that we're talking about. We've actually had auto guidance systems in tractors for 2 decades now. So in 1996, I believe, is when people started first hacking together auto guidance systems in tractors, and now, my brother sits there watching YouTube while the machine is driving itself. He like almost ran someone over one time because it's just, the machine is just doing its thing. And
same as what people are doing with Teslas.
Yeah. So that was like, that's both very exciting to see that these age-old industries can be adopters of dramatically new ways of approaching their problems. But for me, and the reason that we ended up starting FarmLogs and then going and asking Y Combinator to back us was because that pace of innovation had really stalled out, and that was really strange to me. And so it became increasingly obvious that the big companies in the space that everyone assumed was creating the future of farming, that they had kind of stalled out, and they were only looking at how do we make just a bigger tractor with more horsepower. They weren't thinking about how do we remove the human from the tractor altogether. So that was really interesting, and I think it's part of what's led us to where we are.
Yeah, and as we think about the kind of the early indicator discussion, John, you've worked. I looking at your bio, the organizations you've worked with are span far and wide, from like your story about Madonna, but then I think was it NASCAR, the NHL.
Yeah, I've worked with NHL and.
What when you're in with these organizations? Well. I'm sorry. What'd you say?
I was going to say some of the car companies as well.
Car companies as well.
Yeah.
But what are the early indicators that you tend to see where you say, wow, this might not be a household name, but this is going to be a household name? I mean, what are the early indicators you see that you think are kind of indicative of an upcoming success story?
I feel like that question is a little bit out of my range of expertise. The things that I'm really looking at I'm looking at technology that exists, and so in some ways you are too, with satellite map technology, and saying, how can I take this and change how people look at things? I think I'm more about having people understand ideas, and less about, I think, maybe predicting.
Judging the ideas.
Yeah, maybe. I want to see how I can use this stuff. Yeah. I mean, I love all the things that people are working on, but I think every time you have any one of these products, especially a product like Maven, you have to figure out how are people actually going to interact with it, what's going to make a difference to them, and to some extent, like what makes them identify with your specific product as opposed to Uber or any of the other ones. And I think that's really an interesting question now that brands are facing because of the sharing culture. Is in this culture, does my brand still mean anything? What is the meaning that I can get out of this technology that seemingly anybody could come in and disrupt at any time? So, those are the kinds of things I'm looking at.
Yeah.
If I could just add on top of that, I mean,
Jump
Qasar
in.
over lunch we're talking about, these days really the only way to prove that someone wants something is to build it and to put it out there in the world and see how people interact with it. And then oftentimes it may not matter what brand is on it. It might just be, what type of value is it meeting for the customer, and what's the user experience that you're delivering. And I think that's sort of the beauty of technology today, is that it allows you to do that. I mean, you can take that idea, quickly prototype something, and put it out in the world and see how people react to it. So I don't know that anyone can really predict what people want. You might have some ideas, but the best way to do it is to build something. And if you don't get the UX right on it either, like it might not live up to the promise that you thought it would.
But what you're doing is, it's the consumer behavior. I mean, you can't predict that. I mean, you can predict, if you're building a car, I mean, you can design the model and you can blow the air over. You can kind of see what everything's going to happen. But with consumer behavior, you just can't. I mean, are we going to give up owning our cars so that we can be shuttled around, or will we, continue to hold on to it? I mean, that's a tough question to ask.
I usually don't make have strong opinions about like where technology would go, but since we're in Michigan and I've spent 7 years in automotive, I will say this: absolutely, self-driving cars will exist. Absolutely, like Detroit is in a big like risk right now, and I have these conversations with folks at GM. They paid for my undergrad. I have a lot of emotional ties to GM, and to folks at Toyota and other companies, and it's just I'm blown away at the ignorance, and thinking like, oh well, people really want to drive their car in forever. Yeah, they're like people also want horses, but we don't. There are stables you can go ride horses, but that's not the right thing to do because it's more dangerous, less efficient, and more costly.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's kind of fun, and there will always be a subgroup of folks. Like if we're talking about a specific, industry here and specific application technology, there'll always be a subgroup of people who want to drive. But it's the most dangerous thing we do every single day. It's better for you not to drive and smoke every day than it is to drive every day, and that's crazy because none of us are like, when you're in the parking lot, you're like, hey, man, you getting in that car? That's a bad habit. You gotta kill that habit. Like nobody says that, and it's absolutely super fucking dangerous to get in a car every single day. And so like the people who are currently like the leaders of these organizations who think like, oh, we're, people want 3 cars in their driveway. No, they do that because it's forced upon us. If you could share an asset which sits for 98% of its life idly with everybody else in this room, it's actually much more cheaper. And then you can build that asset to be used much more efficiently, and so and used more efficiently. So I think like specifically on self-driving cars, the people who don't think that they're going to happen, I don't even like debate anymore because I'm like, wow, you're like completely missing the boat of the fact that people die. It's very expensive. It's bad for our environment. Like think about the amount of physical goods required to put together a car. That has to be mined out of the earth. It has to be extracted. It's not, this is like, steel doesn't just pop out of clouds, right? And so there's a lot of environmental damage to just making huge vehicles. And that's going to all go away. And I think that's a great thing.
I think it's also a deeper discussion of Metro Detroit, of the startup community, that I think mobility is the one place where we have a shot to build a robust startup infrastructure. There's so many other parts. I think Ann Arbor has probably the strongest startup infrastructure of any place in Metro Detroit. But it has so much room to grow. But the mobility sector, all the people who understand a lot of the vehicle technology are here for now. Zafar, is that something that you watch of, companies that are mobility oriented, that are startups? Some are staying and some aren't. Techstars, they have a whole accelerator for mobility companies. They had 10 companies that went through last year, and only 1 is still here. What do you think? What is the startup infrastructure of Metro Detroit going to be? I
think it's still evolving. I think talent is an important part of the equation, and keeping especially tech talent in the area, I think is still a challenge that we're dealing with here. So for companies like those Techstars alums to graduate and to thrive, they need some of that talent around. They need additional funding around, and I think that we're still working on it. We still have to get there. I have a lot of my own classmates and colleagues who've all studied computer science, computer engineering, and they're all familiar with the type of technology that you need, but they're going to the Valley. They're going to other places, and so yeah, I think there's some ways for us to go before we can have the right talent, the right infrastructure for those types of startups to thrive here.
Yeah. And John, when you look at things that inspire you, the trends that you watch 5 years down the road, I mean, what do you watch? What are you paying attention to right now that's unique? In your space in design and marketing, and where it's intersecting with music and creativity. Right. I mean, what do you watch?
What am I watching?
Yeah.
Well, I watch everything, but I'm very interested in virtual reality now. Obviously, the experiences that I was talking about today, for me, are completely immersive, meaning I forget about the real world. And you have to keep in mind that today it's the worst it's ever going to be. So every year and a half it's going to get twice as good. And it's just going to become more and more and more immersive. I think eventually I'm not going to work in a rectangle. I'm going to work like in a giant monkey or something like that. I think that,
Wait, what?
Like,
what did that mean?
Well, I think that one thing that digital does is that it unlocks the potential of your imagination, so that I'm not really as tied to these physical things, like which include cars. And in the case of Airbnb, I have access to like millions of places that I could go live. I don't have to own it. But I think that what VR is doing is it's kind of the next step of man-made environments. So where before we had like this rectangle that we're in now, now we have like this next natural extension of man-made.
And that's the monkey?
The monkey,
okay.
From me. But everybody can have what they want. I think that when you go to cities in the future, those also will be curated by artists and designers, and that it won't be just a bunch of high-rise buildings with offices that you can't get into. It'll be a much more inclusive experience. And I think in some ways it's going to be an equalizer too. As the technology goes down, the entry point to experience goes up. The technology cost goes down, the entry point to experience goes up. So, that's why I'm very excited about that now.
Qasar, while we're on the topic, through YC, are you seeing a lot of virtual reality companies? What are some of the unique things that you're seeing right now?
We do. We've been funding VR for a while. And I think that's true. I think what John is saying is true. It's going to have a huge impact on just the way we live. I think, like people get distracted by phones today. I think that'll be quaint. There'll be people who will like really be addicted deeply to a reality which is not the world that we're in right now. And I think that sounds scary because it makes us feel really uncomfortable because there's all these like unknown questions. But I think it's completely fine. I think 100 years ago, if you described a phone, I think that is just beyond the comprehension of anybody. 50 years ago, if you described the phone, I think that's beyond the comprehension of, yeah. And so, but if you think about 100 years into the future, what we define as reality is probably be very different, but that's fine. Like, it is the evolution of us, using technology. The earlier point, there's two things that you mentioned earlier, and I just want to touch on before, is one is you said, there's technologies emerging everywhere, and how do you deal with it? And I think, technologies exist around us right now. We're in a controlled environment with microphones and lights. Like, this is not how humanity used to be. So, like, whether you like or dislike technology, it's like that old saying about politics where they say, somebody saying they're not interested in politics is like a drowning man saying he's not interested in oxygen. It's all around you. You have no choice but to deal with the fact that technology is going to come and it's going to penetrate every portion of your existence.
Well, and touch real world things now too, not just these artificial things. So it used to be that you'd see lots of companies getting funded that were just selling digital things to other digital companies. But you guys are funding nuclear energy companies as well too. And so technology is now like transforming every single part of our world at a really rapid pace.
But I would argue it always has. It always has. It's just today, it's like it's somehow more visceral because the path from creation to like in your hands can be like in days.
Yeah.
Like there's a very real possibility. Instagram is a good example. A company sold within 2 years, 3 engineers, there's 11 people, 3 engineers for $1 billion. There's a very, very good chance in the next 5 years there'll be a single person company which will be worth $1 billion. And that's just really hard to comprehend because it's not really a single person actually. Even though that person is the one who created everything, the distribution through your phones, which is obviously not more than one person, the apps, essentially it's like the device is the retail store and the app store within the device is the method to pay and authenticate. Like that's very possible. That you could definitely create an app today. Pokemon Go is a great example. So we had Jack Dorsey from Twitter Square fame at YC a couple of Tuesdays ago, and we had an open Q. We have these like closed dinners, and he has open Q&A at the end. And one of the people said, "Well, you should ask him what it feels like to work on something for 8 years and have Pokemon Go eclipse it within 2 weeks." And it's like that's kind of like a snarky question, and I didn't ask it, but it's like it's very accurate. It's like that will actually happen. So whether you like it or not, technology is around you, and it's going to continue to influence every single aspect. Whether you're a farmer or you work in a retail store or whatever profession or lifestyle you choose. And then the second thing, though, I think is probably more important to underline, is there's this belief that there's a big difference between Jesse and the people in the audience, or myself or people in the audience, or any of us, and there isn't. This is really very, very critical. Like the question you asked was, how do you make it like more attainable for everybody in this room? Can create a technology company. It's kind of like saying, let's just say, how do we start a restaurant? Well, it's actually not that hard to start a restaurant. It takes some effort and it takes some time to learn. And the same thing with technology companies. It's not out of reach for certainly anybody who's in this room, which means you probably speak English and you have enough means to get access to the internet and learn. And so when you kind of approach technology that way, it becomes a less intimidating and overwhelming force when you realize, actually, I can influence and control this ecosystem. And I think that's a really important perspective I think the Valley has that doesn't exist mostly outside the Valley. When people talk about rebuilding a version of the Valley in Detroit or in every city I've been to, Paris, London, Tokyo, Hong Kong, you name it, everyone wants to build Silicon Valley 2.0. They didn't realize it's actually I don't really even think it's funding that's the issue. It's literally the perspective of the people. Cultural changes are much harder to overcome than financing infrastructure because the market's pretty efficient. If you're in the audience and you have a good idea, I'm incentivized to buy a part of your company and fund you. Mm-hmm. That's why I'm here. I'm not here because I was like, hey, what do I do on Saturday? I want to fly to Ann Arbor and just sit on a panel.
Well, you're from Metro Detroit.
I am. I see my parents, so that's a good dad benefit. But the general point that I'm making is these other things are actually quite efficient. Even talent, I think, is actually more mobile than we a lot of times give credit for. But what is very hard is a perspective that every person in this room feels that I could build a huge technology company. And I think that's just so hard, I think, for whatever reason it is. There's an infinite number of reasons why people just don't grasp that emotionally. Like, if me and Jesse did it, I guarantee you guys can too. We're not that much smarter. We're just have more self-belief. I don't know what it is, but we just did it. We just did it. That was the difference. We just did it. You just got to do it. That is really the difference. I think it's been the theme throughout the day.
So Zafar, I'll give you your option of questions to answer here. You can either talk about technology and how you see that shaping automotive, or you could talk about your history in a boy band.
I'll actually opt for a flavor of the latter. Not so much. I think mostly because it sort of piggybacks off of the idea that Qasar just laid down for people here, which is, any one of you in this room is capable of really anything, whether it's starting a tech company or starting a band. I literally, in 2001, with 4 of my closest friends, who all just happen to love music. None of us is formally trained in music of any kind, singing, writing, performing, anything. But just because we were all really passionate about it, we studied it as close as we could just by listening to stuff on the radio and by just sitting together and kind of jamming on our own, probably sounding really terrible at that time. But because we had some of that self-belief and we kind of had a vision of what we wanted to do, and we were collaborating with each other to make each other better, were we able to actually get into a studio and record a song and literally like scrounge up as much money as we could, print up 1,000 copies of that one song on CDs, walk around at a conference with backpacks full of these CDs, and eventually getting someone to believe in us and inviting us to do a show, and then one show leads to 10 shows, and that leads to a record label calling us and saying, hey, we think there's an opportunity here, and so on and so forth. But it all kind of started with that idea that, shit, I mean, why not? We have nothing to lose. And I think regardless of what it is that you're interested in, or whatever kind of is out there that seems interesting to you, that if you just say I can do it, that you can find the right people to do it with and go tackle that. So
Nice
there's
work,
plenty
right?
of incriminating YouTube evidence that I actually did all of that, so you can look that up. But I mean, I think that's a really important principle for everyone to
I
understand.
had no idea where that question was going to go. But
I didn't
way
either.
Way to
but,
bring that around. That was
You
great.
guys set me up pretty well. Thanks.
But I think tech is doing some, but it's that anything is possible idea. I think is, largely it's the tech, but also the creativity part of it. I mean, John, what do you watch like with, in the music world? I mean, I think tech is changing a lot of things. I mean, when you look at the access to the consumer that artists have, which they never had at any other time. I think there's pros and cons to that. I mean, where do you
Right.
fall there?
So it goes both ways. I think there's some elements that are gone that used to be there, which is the mystery behind rock stars. So being able to like build a legend around Led Zeppelin or something like that, I don't think happens necessarily through a Facebook feed where you can see what they're doing every minute of the day. It's more about did you hear what happened in whatever, that kind of spreading, So, there are two sides of it. One is they have instant access to the people who want them, and all of their friends and all of their friends' friends. So that's great, and I think one thing that even I was trying to remind myself when I was coming up here is that your fans want you to do well. And I think a lot of people forget that, they kind of like when you're in this position, when you're putting something out there, as a musician, you're kind of putting your soul on the line and you're very nervous about it. But all your fans really want it to be good, and they're out there for you, and they want to see it happen for you. But the thing that is really interesting to me, which unfortunately I feel like the music industry just kind of has been accepting, is streaming music and products like Spotify, where people don't want to own a physical product, and to some extent, like people offer me downloads and stuff, and I'm like, where am I going to put it? I almost feel like a download is clutter for me now, and like I have
Download is clutter. What?
Yeah, I feel like, because then I got to remember it's in a folder somewhere, like it's on one computer, because I can have any song now, that I want to at any time. And so basically then, how do the musicians make money? And, that's the hugest question.
Well, I think tech's making a lot of influences in that. We've written stories about some guys. They have an operation here called Groovebox Studios, where they crowdsource music, and the fans kind of pay for it in the different levels of investment. They can like play a role in the video or something, but they, they flamed out with their CDs, and they, spent all their money on their CDs, and nobody bought any of them. We actually did a photo shoot of them covered in their CDs as part of the story of their reinvention through tech.
Yeah.
But
no, every so often I go in my basement and I see my pile of CDs from the 90s, and I don't want to like disrespect them, like, but I also don't want to like pull them out and also realize like it's limited to this like one time frame, and I have my Spotify, like where I can just listen to any of it anytime I want. So I think it's more about like, probably for you too, is figuring out how it works economically for artists,
Yeah.
And it's kind of going back to how it used to be, where artists are making their money by actually going out on the road and touring, as opposed to like selling 1 million CDs. That's how you really make money now.
The experience.
The experience, and that goes again to
And the merchandise.
The physical product is not the thing. Everything shifts to experiential. I think it goes along with the other things we're talking about.
Yeah. Do we? I think we have a little bit of time left. Can we? I don't know if anyone has any interesting questions from the audience.
Okay, so first, Maven, my 79-year-old mother wants that car that comes and get her. I'm sure you know that.
Yeah.
Because she's gotten older, she's had a couple of accidents. Now her insurance is unaffordable. She still needs to drive. I just think anybody like 75 and older would be super happy if the car just came and got them. So thanks for keeping my mom in mind. The safety of all of America. Design that. And if there could be like a really long arm or something that could also deliver her groceries up to the doorstep on the car, that would be everything.
Okay. Was that the question?
No.
Okay.
I just one day when that arm exists,
Okay.
remember the original Jay-Z, Julia's Air.
All right.
But no, actually, Jesse, I wanted to ask you about, so, I'm sitting here thinking about, you created this technology, but you came from an agricultural family. Are you like the rock star of Iowa now? I mean, what's that experience on the other side? I'm really curious about that.
I don't know. I'm going to find out this week. I'm going home. We're doing a road show, spending time in the community with farmers. But no, I think we're just building the future we wanted to exist on our own farms, and it's just exciting to be a part of that.
Good. Any other questions? Yeah. Go ahead.
Question for John, actually. Sam, can you project, do you think, how many years we're waiting for a full body haptic experience?
A full body haptic? No, I cannot project that at all. I wish that I could, but honestly, I don't see why it would be that far away. I mean, I'm holding it in my hands. Like, why can't you just put a bunch more haptic things all over you? But I'm not going to build it. But I will make something that feels really cool when you put it on. You're going to be like, whoa, this is cool. But I'm not going to build it. Yeah.
All right.
Soon.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Why do you want that?
We're gonna leave that one alone. I think we all have ideas. Go ahead. If you can ask anything as long as it's not full body haptic experience.
Qasar, so you mentioned that 2/3 of the folks that you fund don't yet have a product. I've got to think there's plenty of ideas that pass the sniff test that this could be viable, but you pass them anyway due to the personalities that are running it. And I'm curious, what do the people who you do fund have in common? Are there common characteristics that you see?
We don't. I mean, we end up ultimately not funding like 98.5% of people who apply for funding. So it's most people don't actually make the hurdle. The common thread between people who do, Jesse's a great example. It's people who know their business, who are serious about their business, competent, emotionally stable, aggressive, positive. People that, one huge luxury that we have, and I say this all the time, and I love it, is, we're in a business that we don't have to work with people we don't like working with. Like, if I don't like the person across the table because they seem to be mean or they seem to be overly greedy or whatever it is, I don't have to have that relationship. And that is like, in the, hierarchy of needs, it is like the tip of the top, which is fantastic. And I think one of the reasons actually why, like, in dollars and cents, that's a good idea is, because if Jesse's kind of a pain in the ass to work with, the people who work for him don't want to work for him, and the company ultimately is not a good company, or his customers don't enjoy being with him. And so, common thread is, the people actually have skills. They're good people. They're ambitious. They're positive, and then they understand something other people don't understand. Like Jesse understands something about farming that other farmers probably didn't understand. And if they did, they didn't try to apply to YC with the idea. So, we took Jesse.
So lesson learned: when you get your 10 minutes with Qasar, don't be an asshole.
Just generally, if you meet me, don't be an asshole. I don't need that in my life.
Or pragmatic, which is equivalent as mine. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a practical question. I have to be in the market for a new car, and I want to know what the time horizon is on the self-driving thing. So I'm going to have to make an investment, and you caused me to rethink.
No need to wait. I mean, I think it's far enough away where if you need a car, like, go buy one. There are plenty of great options out there.
Monday.
Yeah.
Big announcement coming Monday.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is still a long ways to go for the technology and the surrounding circumstances, including infrastructure and policy and everything else. So, yeah, don't hold your breath. But I think
the Tesla, which was doing fine on its own driving, but, and the guy was watching a movie on his phone, and a truck cut him off, and the car had no idea what to do about that situation. I mean, I think those are the things they got to deal with still.
Put up an account in there. There's a bunch of people crashing into trucks right now. They're not watching videos. They're driving right into trucks. So it's I'm so pro GM. It's strange that I'm being a Tesla apologist up here. But I think to answer your question of how fast, I think the biggest issues, at least from what we see when we're trying to fund a Cruise, which GM acquired in the space, is just endpoints. It's kind of actually the last mile of how do you get the groceries to the front door. Everything outside of that is generally solved in terms of, now the question is, can it be solved at a cheap enough price? So that's the kind of next thing that's being worked on. But I think it'll be faster than most people think. It's 2016. I think probably by 2020 you can buy a pretty, it'll be expensive. It'll be like $7,500 grand. But when cars started, they also were not $12,000, Honda Camrys or Honda Accords.
Cars 10 years, so if you're starting to talk about 2020,
maybe it's your next car.
Yeah, I mean,
so
it'll
buy something cool now.
Absolutely will happen in our lifetime, and there's a very good chance if you're having kids right now that they'll never learn to drive, and that's a fantastic thing. It's wonderful.
And if you just buy a Tesla, it gets software updates over the air, right? So that's the new way of distributing technology to the world, is over the air.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh yeah, go ahead.
What is it about the tech space that moves us towards large monolithic companies like Google, Facebook, and Apple?
Wow. Who wants to jump on that one?
I mean, because we're actually not very different from each other. The needs of everybody in this room are strikingly similar. Probably 98% of the things that we do are similar. And so that's one of the reasons. There's other practical reasons like economies of scale and economies of distribution. But it's not inevitable that, there's nothing, it's not a law of physics that all companies in the future have to be large companies. And I think in my own personal positive view of the world is a world dominated by small companies. Can absolutely happen. What large companies have today that small companies don't is the ability to share resources and burden costs across large groups of people. What do you take something like YC? We have 1,300 companies in our portfolio. These companies are sharing a lot of information about how to hire people, how to distribute goods and products while not actually being part of the same organization. So some loose confederation like that I think is absolutely possible, but human greed will probably still overcome that, at least in our lifetime, where it pays to actually build a huge company. That's absolutely a real reason. Larry and Sergey are not just being benevolent and building a huge company. They want more money. That's a part of it. Or influence, whichever way. Money's just a representation of influence. But yeah, influence.
All right, well, good. Well, I'm told we're at our time limit, so I don't know if our hostess wants to come up and say anything else about the conference, or no?
Yeah, but first let's thank our panel. You guys are amazing.